Hello everybody and welcome to another S2 NPA photography video. This week we're going to have a look at the visual element line. The learning intention for today is to understand how to use line to create visual effect within photographs. The success criteria explain how line can be used to create interesting photographs. Secondly, find examples of the use of line within photographs. And then finally, take photographs that show strong use of line. Now, before we begin, I want to explain to you how lines can actually affect photographs. And there are two basic ways that line can have an effect on an image. The first one, lines can create different moods within photographs, and I'll show you some examples of that. And secondly, lines are a very good way of making your audience look at particular parts of photographs, leading your audience through the image from one part to another. So we can think to begin with about vertical lines and the moods that vertical lines can create. So if you look at this fantastic picture, you can see a stairwell, a very modern stairwell, and there's one figure on the sort of upper third of the stairwell. And there's lots of vertical lines within this image. And vertical lines, what they can normally do is project a mood of stability or peace. Within this image, you can see that the main figure is very stable and almost looks like they're praying. So this is a very clear example of how vertical lines can evoke that particular mood. Horizontal lines can also convey moods. Horizontal lines generally convey the feeling of stability, calmness, broadness, or vastness. You'll see this often within landscape photographs. You will see the horizon line sort of cuts through the tree within this image and spans across the entirety of the photograph. Interestingly, the horizon line within this photograph is halfway up the frame. This means that the photographer would have wanted to promote both the sea and the sky equally within an image. But you can see that this image is definitely promoting the mood of calmness and stillness. The photographer has used the horizon line and coupled this with a slow shutter speed in order to render out any of the waves, which emphasises the calm feeling. Other types of lines that we can think about are diagonal lines. Diagonal lines are used a lot within photography and also cinematography, and they can convey a sense of action or make an image seem more dynamic, more as if things are moving within the image, more energy. If we have a look at this image here, for example, of the sort of telephone wires, we can see that there's diagonal lines but also vertical lines within the image, and this creates this sense of movement. And we can see within the second image of these plastic geometric shapes that it's very dynamic. You can sense the energy. When you have diagonal lines within images, it's difficult to explain, but there's more energy. It's as if there's more movement, and you can see that within these images. And when you take photographs, it's very good to look for diagonals. They will make your images appear to be less boring than if we're only dealing with vertical or horizontal lines. Finally, what we want to have a little think about is jagged or irregular lines. That's almost the same as having diagonal lines, but there's a lot more variation of line within an image. So if you look at this photograph on the right hand side, you'll see there's a reflection of a tree in the water. And due to the fact that the reflection seems to be hitting in lots of different directions, the line is very irregular and jagged. They take it almost one step further from this idea of emotion and feeling or movement. While diagonals move us into the area of movement, jagged and irregular lines often impact a sense of unease, tension, or fear, and almost confusion. If you have all these lines going in different directions, there is this kind of uneasy mood which is represented as a result of that. So, what are leading lines? Leading lines is a visual composition technique that makes use of lines to direct the eyes of the people looking at the photograph. People have a tendency to follow lines as they attempt to understand what they are seeing, and photographers often use this as a device to make people look at certain parts of an image, and I'm going to show you some examples. So if you look at this image here, you will see that the diagonal leading lines go from the front of the photograph to the back of the photograph. And this is quite a clever image as the mirror extends the frame further, enhancing these leading lines and making the audience look from the front of the photograph all the way to the back. This image also has very clever use of leading lines. The leading lines within this image direct the viewer to look into the direction that the lady is walking, which is quite a clever device because this almost takes the viewer on the same journey as the subject within the photograph. Very, very clever image. So this week is really about you looking around your local environment for strong and very vivid use of line. I want you to try and find really clear examples of all the different types of line which I've explained so far within the video. And there's lots of examples I'm going to show you just now. Strong use of a diagonal line here, which really breaks up the composition, and it also shows us clearly that the people are moving. The lines within this image are very, very strong, and you can see obviously there's a shadow within this image which creates a structure and a very stable representation of the structure which is being shown. Try and be imaginative. You can see this is a photograph that's very easily created, black and white image, and you can just use your blinds to create lines within a portrait. You can also use reflective objects to change the direction that a line's going in, which is a really nice effect. This is very easily done. You can see this photograph of a spoon with a line pattern underneath, and the line has changed due to the reflection. Another example, we've got the pages of books. Again, not a very obvious example, but you can see that lines are created due to pages of the books. So think about the objects that are around you. Do you see any interesting lines that you can represent in photographs? You may want to focus on lines on a road. This is a very common technique to represent lines in a very literal way. Again, the main thing that I'm really wanting to see is some form of creativity. So you might want to use apps. You can draw lines on top of photographs. There's really no rules. You could use makeup. I want to see people really thinking in interesting ways how they can represent the lines. And like in previous weeks, it would be good if you could hand in your work via the Google form. I've created one and I will share the link, and it's very, very the same as what we've done in the past. I'm looking for all the different types of lines to be represented in your work.